leaders around the world that we have decided to host a show every Monday called Church Communications Live. And it's going to be about helping your church live stream and also navigate video communications and communications in general. I've got a great guest today. Today, we're going to be talking about how to communicate using technology for a time when you might have remote guests and also local worship going on inside of your house of worship. All this is going to be coming up after this short introduction video.
Taking one more breath beside you, so I could find strength to divide us.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Just so you know, so you guys can cut me a little slack, I am producing this whole show myself from an iPad, or a touchscreen. So it's all me here. There's nobody else here in the studio due to social distancing. But we've got a great show today. And this is a brand new show called Church Communications Live. So if you're with me in the chat, say hi. Hi, Brian. How you doing? Hi, Guitar Pixie. It's great to see all of you guys here. And I'm so excited to be... Oh, sorry. That's my fault. So excited to be joined with Michael Begeman. Is that how we say it?
Begeman.
Michael Begeman is here to join me today. And Michael, this was your idea. So maybe you can set the stage a little bit about the idea for having a show like this.
Hey, I'd be happy to. So I belong to a church here. I live in Austin, Texas, and kind of a medium-sized church, 250 people or so. Last year, we started a school of sorts, and ended up having 400 people join. We had no idea that there were that many people who were interested in what we were doing, and we got into Zoom broadcasting one way at that point. And that has expanded. That kind of got us into the world of Zoom and video education, if you will. This year, now our classes were such that we had about 150 people in the sanctuary, in the room, and then another 150 people or so who were remote and who were just watching. So it was a one-way broadcast. There was no feedback from these folks, but the classes themselves in the sanctuary were very interactive. We have a teacher or a leader or a minister who is leading these things. We have a couple of handheld mics, so there's a lot of questions and answers and discussion and so on. And we just left it that way. And people who were not in the sanctuary, well, they just had to listen to what was going on. Well, now COVID comes along. Fortunately for us, we had put in the infrastructure to be able to video broadcast. Thank you, PTZ Optics, for giving us the ability to do that. And so all of a sudden, COVID comes along, and boom, we are 100% distributed, not 50% distributed. So everybody is remote. And at that point, we figured, well, we need to create some mechanism for remote interactivity. We can't just have an hour and a half of a talking head. We had to have this back and forth. So we transitioned from using Zoom webinars to meetings, and we'll talk some more about that. But with the meeting, instead of the webinar, you could have interactivity. We could open people's mics and let them share and respond to them and so on. So we've been doing that now for a few months. Learned a lot along the way, but it's successful. The thing that I'm starting to think about is, well, what happens now when social distancing starts to be tapered off and we have people coming back into the sanctuary? As my minister said, there's no going back. That is, we're not going to be able to just broadcast to the remote people in the future. We're going to have to allow not only interactivity from the people who are together in the sanctuary where we can hand them a microphone, but we also need to allow interactivity from the people who are remote. And so that gets me thinking about, how do we do this? We're going to have people sharing in the sanctuary. We're going to have people sharing from who knows wherever they are. How do we do that from a video perspective, from an audio perspective? There's process things to consider. There's technology to consider. There's personnel things to consider. There's a lot. So last week I reached out to Paul. I said, hey, I bet you have some answers for this. And he said, hey, let's talk next Monday. So here we are.
Well, I'm so glad you did, because it really is something that I think everyone is dealing with. And it's so refreshing to kind of just step back and say, all right, where are we here today? You know, some of us are using Zoom. Other people might be using Skype. Some of us might be streaming just to Facebook. And we're all kind of in this transition together. I have to say, Michael, you guys are really far along on, adopting a lot of this technology and forward thinking to the point where you're saying it's going to be different when we go back. And that was what really excited me, because I totally believe that. 4 or 5 weeks ago when this just started, I remember our church was like, all right, well, we have live streaming set up. We should be okay. And the first weekend when no one could go to church, we only had 15 people watching when there should have been 250. So the word didn't go out. People didn't know what to do. How does we set this up? And then the next week, we had 150. And so it's slowly changing, but we still haven't gotten to the point where we're fully adopting, raising hands and allowing people to join in, and the full collaboration that I do think is possible. So I'm excited to jump into this with you, and also lots of other people who are joining. So Michael, explain to me this new normal that you're seeing in the future.
Yeah, well, the new normal is that people have started going to church from home now. Now, I know that there were always the big televangelists and so on, so that was normal for a small segment of the population. But in the last 2 months, it's become normal for 100% of the population, at least the population that goes to church, right? There are billboards around town now, around Austin, that says, online church, it's a thing. And you know what? It is a thing, certainly for us. So, we have always liked to get the people together, right? We've always liked bringing people together in a sanctuary. We enjoy the fellowship. We enjoy the, what I call the wet and warm part of the church services, the hugging and all that, the breakfast that we have beforehand. But the new normal is that we're probably not going to have that for quite a while, even as the social distancing restrictions start to get relaxed. There's still a number of members of our community who are at risk in different ways, because of age or other health-related issues. They're not going to be coming back. I don't want to see them coming back. I want them to be taking care of themselves. And the question is, well, how do we include them as fully as possible as active members of the community, as active participants in the interactive sessions and the classes that we have? Today, they are completely on a peer-to-peer basis with everybody else. They are not disadvantaged in any way. But as soon as we open the doors and some part of the community can come back and join us in the sanctuary, suddenly there is the risk is that then the people who are remote participants would be disadvantaged. And we want to figure out how to include them ahead of time. So, the new normal is, we are all over the place, and that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, it's really pushed. This could have happened in 5 years from now, and we've kind of been forced to do it in 3 months. As people got more maybe acclimated and familiar with all of this technology, now we're forced to. My wife and I were watching. Jack Johnson had a raise funds for Hawaii, and his final song was, "It's better when we're together," and it's totally true. It's the absolute best experience when we're together in one place. But for the safety of many folks who are members of our churches, simply it's just not even when, as you said, the restrictions kind of calm down, it still might not be the safest option. So what we want to do is, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is how can we make it more interactive and at least and try to include people as absolutely best we can knowing that there are many who it may take months for them to be able to come in and be part of the congregation the way they would joining in person. And I think you're right on, Michael, by trying to have more of a Zoom meeting where people can share their screens and see each other. And it's so much more powerful, in my opinion, than a one-way broadcast. And so I really think you're onto something. And that's what I want to talk about today. In fact, right now, just as an example, we are hosting a Zoom conference. So we have actually lots of people here, and we're going to be able to demonstrate how to have not only a Zoom meeting, but a secure Zoom meeting, and a meeting where Tess right now is a moderator of that meeting. And she is intentionally, and thank you for being here, everyone. We're going to unmute your microphones and kind of explain how all of this works. But she's a moderator right now, and she has everyone except for Michael muted. And we're going to talk a little bit about the controls when you do have these large meetings, and include them that you can actually have good control. This is just a picture of kind of some of the things that are happening online. But this new normal, I think what a lot of people have discovered is that their community is actually a little larger than they thought when they went online. And I think one of the questions becomes, is it complex to have this 100% distributed church? You can have these Zoom meetings, but I think it's maybe a little bit more complex when we're doing the half in person, half distributed. And that's what we're going to get to. And that's what I believe, where your mind is at right now, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Up until this recent time, we thought that everybody who was a member of our church was in Austin, Texas. One of the things that we did was we created a number of small groups that were meeting during the week. We, sent out an email, through our, we sent out an email, who wants to be part of a small group during the week? We had 400 people who said they wanted to be part of a small group. I was wondering, who are these people? It was stunning to us. So we bought a whole bunch of Zoom licenses. We started scheduling them. We started sending out Zoom IDs. So, once a week, people can come together in a small group, meaning 10 to 12 people, and for an hour, do kind of spiritual sharing and talk about what's going on in their life, especially in the world of COVID. Talk about the lesson that we put out for the week and so on. But I got in my first, small group, and there were two of us from Austin, somebody from San Antonio, somebody was in St. Louis, somebody was in Queens, somebody was in New Hampshire, and my wife, who normally sits about 6 feet away from me over here, her first group, there was somebody from the Middle East who was in her group. And it's like, we used to know who our community was. We don't know who our community is anymore. Anybody who is broadcasting, anybody who is streaming their church services, you don't know who is a part of your community anymore. And it's very exciting and very eye-opening. And I mean, this is certainly a time of not only social evolution, but also technological evolution. And, we're looking at, well, God, how can we put these things together and, and make the best of it?
Well, and it's so incredible. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because up until now, it has been so much one-way broadcasting. And there's been many great things with that. And I've spoken to so many pastors who say, we're surprised how many people watch online every Sunday. It's almost like we have a whole second church that we don't know really that well. They're there, they're watching every Sunday, they're contributing to the church financially, but we don't have a face to match them. And it's interesting, in the video communication side of things, with Zoom being such a great tool, 93% of all communication is nonverbal. So if you really want to get to know these people, going on a Zoom conference and seeing them face to face, especially like you said, in small groups, especially you can do, spiritual sharing and things of that nature, that's how you can really get to know these people. And Zoom is such a great tool for that. Not only can you have, this is a picture here of 50 alumni friends of mine who were all on a Zoom conference, but you can also do breakout sessions. So you can have a large meeting with, up to 300 people, which usually serves most churches. And then they have licenses that can go higher. But then you can actually, without having to leave that meeting, you can actually have breakout sessions where you can have, just the Sunday school and just, different areas. And we can even demonstrate that today as well. But I think what we found is that going 100% distributed, a one-way broadcast just doesn't do enough for communicating. So the question becomes, how can we become better communicators and use the tool? We're going to look at Zoom today. I understand there's Skype and there's Google Meet and there's others, but I do think Zoom is really one of the best out there. So we were going to take a little bit of a deep dive into Zoom. And I'd love to know, Michael, how you guys are using it. But just to familiarize some people with it, there's like 4 simple modes. You can simply launch a meeting. You can schedule a meeting. You can join an existing meeting. And I would imagine, Michael, most of the times you guys go ahead and schedule a meeting before Sunday, and then you share it out with everyone, maybe via email.
No. So we're using both webinars and meetings for all of the things that we're doing. So some things, so there are 2 worship services during the week where we still do it in a broadcast mode. There's no interactivity to that. And so for that, we use webinar, and we just have one webinar ID, and everybody knows it. It's on our website, and there's no scheduling to it at all. For the meetings, we've done the same kind of thing, but all of our now I'm setting aside the small group meetings, but the large things that include 200, 300, 400 people. Those are set meetings. We didn't bother to use the scheduler. We created a meeting ID. We distributed it to everybody. We didn't bother with the password because we have there's a large percentage of our population which is really low tech. It's a big deal for them to click a link. Let's just be honest about it. So rather than kind of putting the onus on them for the security of the meeting, we decided to do it on our side through good moderation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're going to talk about some of the settings that you would create in a meeting, but we basically the ones that were important to us were muting all participants upon entry, making sure that participants could not unmute themselves, and making sure that participants could not share their screen. We figured if we got those 3 things nailed down, then whoever came in wasn't going to inadvertently or maliciously take over the meeting, that we could still control it. We have a few people who are trained up to be really good moderators, like Tess is for this particular meeting, where they can spotlight people, where they can unmute them, where they can remute them, where they can throw them out if they happen to forget to put on their shirt before they dialed into the meeting or whatever. This has happened. So we're relying on the skills of our moderator plus a few key Zoom settings to make sure that the thing goes off smoothly.
Well, and we're going to go over some of those key Zoom settings because doesn't come familiar to everyone. We're definitely going to try to familiarize with you guys on how those work. We've definitely had issues with Zoom bombing here. We've live streamed to YouTube and Facebook, and we're sharing our meeting ID, and random people have joined. So in this session, we actually have a password. And we're a little bit more of a high-tech group. We expect, we're emailing the password out to a select group of people. But I understand why a church, especially for like a worship service, wouldn't want to maybe put that barrier of entry into everybody. That makes a lot of sense. And then just to kind of clarify the difference between a meeting and a webinar gives you a little bit more control, almost like a one-way broadcast where you can upgrade attendees to be on camera and be in a panel, but generally you have a little bit more control of keeping like everyone's video off during that time. So having people pop in isn't as big a deal. On the meeting side, it seems like you're using that more for smaller sessions. Is that true?
Well, not only for smaller sessions, but also for some of our classes where we do have the interactivity.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a webinar, so everybody who's watching Zoom right now, you see the thumbnails of other participants across the top or down the side, however you have your interface set up. So you have the presence of other people, the visual presence of other people there during a Zoom meeting. So when we are having our classes, even the big ones with a couple hundred people, so that they can see each other, and that helps to build a community, right? It helps to keep the presence of the community there. People like seeing each other. They like seeing their friends who they haven't seen in a few weeks because they haven't been to church together and so on. However, there is also an element of that, of having all of the thumbnails available in a meeting, which can be distracting, especially if people are more interested in clicking through and looking, at the 100 thumbnail or the 300 thumbnails to see if, Billy is online today or not. So for the worship services, we really wanted to use the webinar so that element of distraction is been removed, because in those cases, we just want to be delivering a particular message, and we want it to be really tight and focused. When we move into the classes, we then use the meeting format. It's a little bit looser. You see other people. We allow other people to speak. So it depends. It depends.
Well, I'm glad we made that distinction, because that is a really good use of the two different versions of Zoom that are available. And I think you're using them perfectly. Just to kind of just go over this quickly, you have a microphone and a camera, very simple. One of the things I really love about Zoom is that little microphone has a little level inside of it. So if you're not seeing anything in there, no one can hear you. If there's a strike inside of that microphone, then you're muted. Same with the camera. You either see your video or you don't, and you can turn it on and choose your options. The screen share button couldn't be easier, but in that screen share option now, there is a little up arrow, and you can use that to go into the advanced screen share settings and determine who gets to screen share. And Michael was talking about maybe restricting that just to the host of the meeting, just so that people can't screen share and kind of take over the meeting. You can, of course, record your meetings, and you can do closed captions, which is nice. You can also have breakout rooms, and it's something that I've been using a lot. And it's really funny. I was reading a New York Times article where they were doing dinner parties, where they have a big meeting of 50 people, and then they have five or 10 breakout rooms where those 50 people can go and talk to 5 people in these breakout rooms, and then come back to the main room. So very interesting uses for the breakout rooms, which you can enable on your Zoom settings to see that pop up. And then, of course, the end meeting button, which is just to leave. But this is such a simple interface. I know it's kind of powerful and a lot of options, but it's just right on the bottom. It actually disappears if you're not hovering over it. And it's just kind of really straightforward, I feel like. So
yeah, I agree. Using Zoom has been, again, I said, we have a pretty low-tech group, or at least we actually, what's accurate is that we have a pretty good bell curve, right? And we don't want to leave anybody out, including the technological laggards in the group. So having a really clean and simple interface is important, and we were just lucky that Zoom came along when they did.
it's true. Zoom hasn't only been around since 2013. That's a good 7 years, but they really the product is really mature now, and there's just so much that it can do. So in these meetings, during the webinar style, it's more of a one-way broadcast. But during the meetings, are you allowing others to share, or are you leveraging the raise hand feature, which I wanted to show? It's a little cut off, but it's at the bottom there in the middle. And it gives, these moderators the ability to see who would like to maybe be unmuted. And is that how you're handling the larger classrooms?
Yep, that's exactly how we're doing it. So we have our moderator click on the participant button. So the participant panel opens up on the right-hand side. And there you have a list of all of your participants. What a surprise, right? And the thing that is handy about this, okay, we're going to see this happen right now. Good. And if you're full screen, it'll actually dock over on the right hand side. Now the thing is, if you're having a class with with a couple of hundred people in it, or even over 100 people, you don't want your moderator to have to be scrolling up and down to figure out who has raised their hand. And this is a nice thing about Zoom. When a participant clicks the raise hand button, they float up to the top of that participant panel. So the moderator, so like if you test right now, she would just be looking at the top of the participant list. And if any of you clicked on the raise hand button, your name would float to the top of that list. And you can see there's a couple of people with little blue hands next to their name. So that lets the moderator know who has something to share. And at that point, the moderator can focus over their name and can unmute them. And at that point, that person can share. And our moderator is live. Everybody knows that there's a moderator on board. So in this case, ooh, good job. So I want to know how to do that, Tess. Right. So that's right. So you focus over it. You unmute the person. We always let them know verbally. We'd say, Tess, what do you have to share with us? And all of a sudden, we unmute them. That person can speak, and then the moderator mutes them again when they are done, because just because they have finished sharing doesn't mean that they're not going to be talking to their dog in a minute.
Do you want to go ahead and just do that really quickly? And just, how about Dean? I see your hand is raised here. Why don't we just go ahead and unmute you? And Dean, do you just want to say hi really quickly?
Yes, greetings all. Thank you. I love being unmuted and muted again.
Thank you so much, Dean. But that's just I want to make this a dynamic as possible. So yeah, so that's a great way to do it. And even us, I have to say, we're just learning how to do this ourselves. How do you manage 50, 100 people in a class? These are the types of tools that you need to look for, and you absolutely need a moderator of some sort to do that.
Yeah, also from a process standpoint, at least when we're doing a class, we have ourselves time boxed. So we may talk about a lesson for 10 minutes, and then we'll say, now, so who has any questions or any reflections about that? And we'll give ourselves 5 or 7 minutes for that. So we are inviting the participation. At that point, the moderator is unmuting and remuting people. And then when the time for that is up and we want to go back and present the next module or the next bit of teaching, one of the things that the moderator can do is lower everybody's hand. So it's kind of a reset on that. We go back, we lower everybody's hands. There's a new 5 or 10 minutes of teaching, and then the person who is leading the class again says, so who has any questions? Who has something to share? And we go back. So it's one of the ways that we make sure that we're able to cover all of the points that we want to make during a class is by structuring it that way and limiting the amount of sharing and questions to particular blocks of time that we've put in the agenda.
Well, I think it's so smart, and it's such a great way to use this. We talked about kind of using the Zoom raise hand feature, and there's also an entire chat room. And I was actually just kind of playing around with the ability to kind of have the chat room half the screen and the participants the other. Obviously, you could just have a full bar of chat or half and half. But that chat room allows you not only to speak to everyone in the group, but privately to specific people. There is a setting to turn private messaging off if you're worried that one meeting attendee is going to privately be talking to another, and that might be annoying. But you can turn that off, and you can also do file sharing and emojis and things like that right through this chat interface here.
Yeah, I guess we have a two-geek household here. My wife is has been pushed into this unwittingly over the last year as well, and she is getting ready to be the moderator for a Zoom conference that's going to be this coming Thursday, Friday, and Saturday that currently has 1,300 people worldwide that are signed up for this. So it's somebody who's a spiritual teacher who is going to be delivering this, delivering the content. Pamela is going to be doing. Pamela is my version of Tess. She's going to be sitting over there. She's minding all of this. We thought that the chat feature, when there's 1,300 people, it could go completely bonkers, especially all around the world. There would be such a distraction. So one of the settings that you can set on the host side, so on the web interface, not in the client, but in the web interface, the administrative panel, is you can restrict chats so that they only go to the panelists in a webinar. So what we're doing is we're allowing these 1,300 participants to submit questions to the panelists using the chat feature, but nobody else sees those, and the panelists can sort through them and figure out what they want to address. And again, it's a way of allowing some kind of input from the people who are part of the webinar, but not creating this huge flood of distraction for everybody else.
That is such a great tip, and I didn't want to show my dashboard just because there's some private information there, but you can log into zoom.us and you do get a host of new features that are available, including things like allowing folks to have remote camera control, or restricting chats and things of that nature. So definitely check out the zoom.us dashboard. I should have prepared a slide for that, but I did not. Now, I'd love to pull Tess in for a minute about being a moderator, because she's done such a good job. She's been scared at times when we have had people. Before we had a password, we literally had people who came on without the right clothes on or saying things that weren't appropriate. So it really does happen. So I think it's important to have a moderator, and important to understand the security options that are available inside of Zoom. So I definitely would feel remiss if we didn't go over these security features. Zoom posted this funny little picture of the security guards outside of a club, and inside of the club is your Zoom session. So when you schedule a meeting, you can have a password. And you don't have to have a password. You might not want one, but if you really want it to be secure, that is one of the first steps, is to enable the password. If you don't have a password, you're still going to have a lot of controls here. Under the advanced options area, which is actually a little bit nested, you have to click a little down arrow to get to it. But when you do click that down arrow, there's an option to enable a waiting room. And what that does is it actually makes people kind of, before they get into the meeting, they have to be admitted by the host. Is that something that you use, Michael, or do you let people just jump right into the meeting?
We don't. We allow people to jump right into the meeting. And I'm interested if you all have used this. You, in which case you would know more about it than I do. But I was part of a conference, a Zoom conference about 2 weeks ago, where they had a meeting, had a waiting room. And it was great. Everybody was waiting, and it said the conference will start in 10 minutes or so. And then all of a sudden the conference began. Everything was fine. The person who was leading was sharing their screen. But the thing that I saw, and I'm wondering if there was some setting about this, but apparently after the meeting had started, people who subsequently joined kept coming into the meeting room, because what I would see on the host's screen, since they were sharing their screen, were these things saying, so-and-so is in the waiting room, so-and-so is in the waiting room, and they had to keep admitting people. So I don't know if there's a way of having a waiting room and then just saying, okay, it's open for all. or if you have to keep admitting people.
So as of right now, as far as I know, if you have the waiting room enabled, you have to continue to admit people. And that's what's happening right now.
That's a bummer.
It is a bit of a bummer because and I'm sure Zoom will fix that, or at least add an option. I haven't seen that option, and I do keep my eye on the back end options out there. I have some people I can ask about that. Great feature requests. I know exactly what you're talking about. But I think with the waiting room feature as it stands, that's what it's supposed to do. In case, someone you don't know who they are, is asking to join, you don't want to let them in. No matter what time it is in the meeting, they're not allowed in. But you also mentioned an important part of the waiting room is that you can go to your dashboard and you can display a custom image in the waiting room. So if someone joins, before the meeting is supposed to start and they're in this waiting room, you can give them some information. You can show a PowerPoint slide, saved as a JPEG up there. And then the other option here is join before host. And that's something I've always done, which is if you're running 5 minutes late, or they can just join, they're just going right into the meeting without you having to be there. If that's not checked, you have to be in that meeting for others to be able to join.
Yep. And all of our meetings are open from a join before host perspective. I always try to get the meeting actually going, 30 to 15 minutes ahead of time, and we'll use share screen and put up something so that people who are coming know that they've arrived at where they're supposed to be, and that what they want to see is going to be coming.
I have a little hack that I'm interested to show, maybe next show, but something I've thought about. As you may know, and maybe people don't know this, but in Zoom right now, my video is coming through basically a virtual input. So I could play a video and it would show into Zoom. And one of the things I've thought of is in the future, having the ability to, maybe if you have 30 minutes before a Zoom starts, maybe you play a video on loop that is just saying, "Hi, everybody, meeting hasn't started yet. My name is Paul Richards. I'll be the host today, and we'll be joining you soon," so that you can be doing something else. And, you're kind of greeting people over and over again. But I don't know how valuable that would be for folks, but it's an interesting thought I've had. But continuing with the security part, so there's the password, there's the waiting room. You can even only lock it down to authenticated Zoom users. And then you can lock your meeting completely. So if you have got everybody you need and you're not accepting any more people, you can click the lock meeting button in the participants panel, which will not let anyone get back in. Now, the other buttons here that are really important, and Michael referenced these a few minutes ago, you can mute all participants on entry, which is a good thing to do, but you can go a step further and you can decide whether you want them to be able to unmute themselves on their own, or they have to be unmuted by the host. And then another feature that's important to check really is allowing participants to rename themselves. This is an interesting one. I've seen it used in two different ways. I was on an alumni conference with some friends from college, and everyone was asked to rename themselves and say, put your real name, because sometimes you join and it'll just say Paul, maybe not Paul Richards, the way I want people to see my last name. And then we would rename ourselves with where we're from, so that you could look at everyone in the meeting and you could see, oh, there's Joe from Ohio. There's Michael from Texas. And so you can ask people to kind of go through this icebreaker moment where everyone's saying, please rename yourself. Just go to the participants panel, click the rename button, change your name, but also go ahead and, put where you're from. And it's a great icebreaker. It kind of helps people get to know each other. If you don't allow people to rename themselves, the reason why you're doing that is because if you kick someone out of the meeting and then they rejoin, they could just change their name. It could be difficult to, find the Zoom bomber. people to rename themselves and give everyone a little bit of that little extra reference point of where they're from, or, whatever type of extra piece of information, because it's in a tag right on their video panel. So if you're managing 50 people, it's kind of nice. There might be 2 Pauls, right? And you want to have a little bit more information. So I've seen that used pretty well. And then finally, there's in the admin area, there's a whole security tab. And now there's an entire security button as well, which is probably worth showing since we're on that topic. You see this little security button down here. That security button now allows you to really dig into all the security features that Zoom offers. And we're just spending so much time on this because the last thing you want is to go through all of this and, have just be unexplainable what happened and who took over your meeting. So all of these things that we've been talking about are right here now: locking the meeting, enabling the waiting room, whether or not you want to allow participants to screen share, rename themselves, or chat, and the ability to remove participants easily. So I have to say too, Michael, Zoom went under a little bit of an attack as far, or at least publicity about all this Zoom bombing and security features. But I've done my research. I went and looked at Google Meet and Microsoft Teams and all of these, and they don't even have the level of detail of control that Zoom has. So they've done an amazing job quickly making these security settings more accessible.
Right. Yeah, well, everybody likes to pick on somebody, right? So there are a few of these events, and they are fun to report on in the media. So I think the problem is reported is more significant than it is in reality.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I believe we can pretty much almost open it up to Q&A now, which is an important part of all of this.
Well, I have the first question.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, all right. So I want to see if we have, hopefully there's time for us to kind of come back to the original thing that had me send an email to you last week. And that is looking forward to the day when half of the people attending a class are together in the sanctuary and another half are participating via a Zoom meeting. So, so let's say that we are running the class, sort of the same process, and the leader says, okay, well, who has something to share now? So it's easy when there are people in the sanctuary, they raise their hand and you call on them and you hand them a microphone. So if I have somebody who is sitting on a platform or a stage in front of 150 people, our leaders are not as tech savvy as I would particularly like. So they're not going to be sitting there with a laptop also checking that and to see who's floating up to the top of the participant panel. So from a technology standpoint and from a process standpoint, I know that we're going to have a person who is a moderator sitting in the sanctuary, watching Zoom. They're going to have to see that there are people who want to raise their hand. We need to let the class leader or the minister know. We have to somehow pipe their audio from the laptop into the sound system of the sanctuary. It would be great if the minister could see the person as they are sharing. But that's bringing a whole bunch of, it's bringing audio and video from Zoom into our face-to-face setting. And we've never done that.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in, so let's talk about this integration if we have time.
Yeah, no, we do. And that really is kind of almost a conclusion. And I do want to we will have time for Q&A, everybody. I know a lot of people have been waiting. And if you've got questions on YouTube and Facebook, ask them, because this is kind of the answer, the question that we're trying to answer. And I feel uniquely able to answer this question, Michael, because we're doing a lot of this right now. And I've been in situations where we've attempted to do this, such as we did a StreamGeeks conference in New York City where we really wanted the audience to be just as integrated as the in-person audience. We had about 200 people in person, but we had more people watching online. And it was one of our goals to really do this. So there's a couple pieces of technology that are obviously going to be important. And it's clear that you're going to need a moderator. A human is going to be needed to interact between the digital Zoom session and the physical pastor, worship leader, and the congregation. That person is going to be key in achieving this goal. When we're in this hybrid world where we have, let's say there's questions from a person in person, and then there's a question from a person in Zoom. I think it's fair to give it a 50-50 kind of priority, if you will. So if there are 10 people online and 10 people in person, it would kind of be like one question in person, one from online. And what that would look like in the church, in the sanctuary, it would be one physical person with the microphone, the moderator on behalf of the speaker, or an audio conferencing system that was able to be actually opened up into the space. So it is possible to have a Zoom conference that literally is going on, and there's live speakers, speakers. What I mean by speakers is speakers that could actually be broadcasting, like unmuting someone and having them speak into the church space, into the sanctuary. That is possible. Now, with that being said, if that is the way that it's set up, there is a little bit of a complicated audio routing situation that needs to be handled, but it can definitely be done. And it essentially is a audio conferencing system that is used regularly in conference rooms around the world. Conference rooms have what they call Zoom rooms, and it's literally a television with a camera and a microphone, and you walk in and you just talk to people in Zoom, right? So, I mean, if you think about it from that perspective, now we're doing a little bit more than that. We're capturing the Zoom into maybe a live stream like we're doing now and live streaming it on YouTube and Facebook, which I think is important for a very public stream. And we could talk a little bit about that. But I think that it essentially goes from, okay, we've got a Zoom conference with maybe an in-ear mic headset, which is what I have now, to an audio conferencing system that actually has speakers in the space and microphones in the space that have been connected together to have the echo cancellation that's required to do that. So that literally it's almost, I mean, depending on how you want to set this up, it could sound exactly like someone from around the world is getting unmuted. They're a trusted person. The moderator knows their question. Their hand has been raised. We're going to unmute them, and literally everyone in the space can now hear them. And I think that is where I think maybe the solution is headed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this over the last week since I sent the original email. We have in the back of the sanctuary, we have a 24-channel mixing board. Somebody sold us a lot more than we needed 20 years ago, and guess what? And now we're using it. Right? We have a couple of people wearing body packs. We have a couple of handheld microphones. We have other microphones for audio inputs for the guitar and the piano and vocalists who are singing. We don't have a whole band, but it's we have a few musicians. So a laptop is just another audio source, so that we could run into the soundboard. And the only thing that I've thought is that can be tricky about this is that all of the audio that we're currently capturing through the soundboard is now being routed into a microphone input on the laptop, because that's going out to the world as that's the audio from the sanctuary going out via Zoom. So we need to make sure, for those of you who have been around audio, you can see that there's a potential here for feedback, which is instant. So what we're going to have to do, I think, is to take the audio output from the laptop, that is the thing that would be heading into the soundboard, but amplified and coming out of the existing speakers in the sanctuary. But we would have to make sure that that channel is not routed into the mix that ends up going back into the laptop.
Well, it's certainly, it could cause a lot of issues. You're 100% right, because any of those open microphones, even the microphone that's given to the person who is asking Q&A, as soon as those speakers come into it, there's a potential for a loop. But I mean, luckily there are products that do basically the echo cancellation for that. So it certainly can be done. The things that I'm thinking of now is basically there are boxes that take microphone inputs and connect to speakers right in the same room, and they take all of the inputs and do like a mix minus and get rid of the incoming audio as it connects to Zoom, for example. So we should, I'm just really interested in this, and we'll have to really look at a wiring diagram together and think about some typical scenarios. And I have someone actually, it's interesting. We work with a lot of audiovisual engineers, and many of them right now do not have they're not as busy as they once were doing all of the integrations for corporations and businesses that are shut down right now. So I actually have access to some really smart engineers who I'm sure would be happy to think about this through with me, because I know that there is a way to use audio conferencing in a space with multiple microphones, multiple speakers, and have it coexist with but I think that the takeaway here is that most church production systems have been designed for in-room experiences and adapted for one-way broadcasts. And the one-way is fine, but bringing it back in does require really just mainly audio routing. And I do believe probably audio conferencing specific hardware. I'm not 100% sure, but I would definitely like to look at your system, Michael, and as a template, and maybe share that on an upcoming show, whether it is just a simple audio routing situation, or if it does require a piece of hardware that has, the ability to do echo cancellation and noise cancellation and mix minus and those types of things. It'd be interesting to see, because I'd really need to draw it out on paper.
Well, we're going to be experimenting with it, so I'm happy to be the guinea pig in this. The other thing that is a component, so I'm monopolizing the question space here. Last one. I don't know if it was you or if it was Tess who was zooming in on the corner of the participant panel. But one of the things that I was thinking, rather than having, so I know that we have to have a live moderator as part of the mix here. But I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice if, maybe on a music stand next to the pastor, there was a tablet where all they saw was basically the top part of that participant list. So they could glance over and see the list of 5 or 10 blue hands that were up. And then they could call on somebody without having to have a moderator say, oh, Paul has a question. Oh, Michael has a question. The question that I have is, how do we do that?
Well, and I think that I have a somewhat of an answer, and I've actually had this question, and I've reached out to some different companies that I thought would be have a half of the solution, and they just need to integrate Zoom into what they have. Like, for example, what I'd like to show here is, I think it's this picture right here. So what I have in front of me, which hopefully you guys can see, let me get this up a little higher, is basically the whole YouTube and Facebook chat. So I can go through it, and I can also just view a queue. So like if I put this one in the queue, this one in the queue, and I'm the moderator, and I put another one in the queue, and now I could say, just show me the ones that are in the queue. And so this is the vMix social app. It's one of the best I've seen out there. And what I would love is to have, I'd have YouTube, I'd have Facebook, and they do not currently support Zoom, but I've asked the creators, hey, could you add Zoom in there? Then we would have the ability to answer questions from Facebook, from YouTube, and from Zoom. And the pastor would just have to simply have a tablet, type in this IP address, which would be stored in the bookmarks. They click a button, and they just would see whatever the moderator cues for them. And so I think it's going to be someone just beyond Zoom themselves that's going to need to integrate this solution, because the Zoom chat's great, but what if one's coming through Facebook, or YouTube? We want to merge all of them together, and vMix has the best one that does right now. They do on vMix Social, they have the ability to do YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and something called IRC. And I think that we may be able to use IRC. IRC is essentially a chat It's the oldest chat platform in the world. Actually, it was like around before the internet. It was like invented in the 70s, and I believe there may actually be a way. And this is something again that you're giving me two follow-ups. One is definitely the audio conferencing side, which we should really look at together and maybe discuss on a follow-up show. But the other thing that I think actually is coming to me now is that we may be able to have like a little app. Have you ever heard of Slack? So there's well, let's just imagine like a chat room, like just a little chat room, and the little chat room is available to the moderator, and that chat room would be an IRC. It's so funny because I've always known that vMix can do this, but I've never had a reason to use it because Facebook and YouTube and Twitch have been so important, and Zoom has really become so important only recently, as opposed to it was always there before, but we didn't use it as much. If vMix integrated directly into Zoom, as a moderator, you would just click the ones you want to show the pastor, and the pastor would just go through that short list. And that would be amazing, but today that doesn't work. But there's an IRC chat feature, which I believe that a moderator should be able to copy and paste the name of the person and the message and basically input it into a little chat window. And then this whole system would be usable for the pastor to see, because that would be how they enter the Zoom messages into the vMix social. So Facebook and YouTube are integrated already. But the IRC would have to be a manual portion of them copying and pasting out messages from Zoom into a little chat room that when they did that, it would be shown to the pastor on their tablet.
Got it.
So
one of the kind of the direction that I was going with this, so this is, I'm a do-it-yourselfer. So I was wondering if in OBS, and I saw there were questions over here about virtual cam, and I've been playing around with that and NDI sources, and I was thinking, oh, well, I could probably pull, I can use OBS to capture that part of the Zoom window.
Mm-hmm.
And have that be a virtual source, an NDI source, and then have a tablet that is just pulling that NDI source.
Yeah. You certainly could. You certainly could. And I would and that's another way to do it as well, would be to and the other thing too that's really powerful and maybe useful too is Google Drive. I don't know if you ever use Google Drive or Google Docs. But I would say another way to possibly do this too would be to have a shared Google Doc.
Sure.
And you've got a Google Doc on a tablet, because with NDI, you're really sharing like high bandwidth, meant for broadcast video over your network and with a tablet. But when really all you're trying to share is chat messages. So if you use a Google Sheet and you just have the moderator keep the top 10, rows in that Google Sheet open, and column 1 is the name and column 2 is the message. Google Sheets are instantaneously updated, very low bandwidth. It runs on anything at all with a web browser. It could be a Chromebook. It doesn't have to be, because with NDI you have to run like a pretty highly powerful Windows laptop or tablet to use it. It doesn't even really work that well on iPads. But if you could somehow get things over to Google Sheets, it would work on anything and be super fast and reliable. So maybe that would be a good way to do it too.
Well, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but I think that we have time to experiment with this before the doors are opened again.
Well, that's a very good point. And the vMix side of things, I understand that vMix is a little bit more expensive. I think it's $60 for the HD version. But the value of the vMix Social is that we can now hit a button and it's on the screen for the broadcast for everyone to kind of see. So there is some interesting value there. I love using it. Here's Otis saying, we love vMix too. We use vMix Social all the time. And, going to your monitor scenario, vMix Social is very good for that. For example, if you had a big old monitor for the pastor to look at, you could definitely have that powered by an NDI source, right? And yes, you could screen capture with OBS. You could probably screen capture the Google Sheet, depending on whatever works best for you. But it kind of gives you some easier options to just fill space really quickly. Here's Dennis saying you would need a phone PBX system. Yeah, I really do think that there is definitely a system for the audio conferencing side of this that we're talking about.
I'm looking at the chat and I don't know Taylor Hutchins, but he says we're making it way too difficult and that they can share what they do.
Well,
yeah,
hopefully,
you've got quite a few people who want to chime in, Paul, if you wanted to.
Let's bring them in. Let's bring them in, because I mean, this is the great thing about all of this is that we have so many smart people who are always willing to share and help.
Yeah, welcome, Taylor.
Sorry, thanks. So it's literally this cable right here. It's a female XLR to a 3.5 millimeter, and then this adapter, 3.5 millimeter to USB. We use it every Sunday in our contemporary worship space for like captioning. The people who are hard of hearing, we have a streaming service that does that for us. But we can take that, plug it into the computer as far as the being able to talk to different people or whatever it may be from because we have several missionaries in Palestine or whatever, and they'll Skype in, and it just is going. We have the a digital console. Our audio is routed out through the console, and I can pick and choose what's in there, what microphones are in there, etc. Goes right in, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. This is literally like $20. That's really all you need.
That's awesome.
So are you using that for, so I get it that you can use that for streaming out to the remote pre-fold. Are you having them providing audio back into the people in your sanctuary?
Yeah, what I do is I come out, if they're coming natively into the computer, I set the output on my computer. I'm using an iMac Pro. iMac on my computer, I come out through headphone jack into the digital console, just like I would to play audio or to play a video or whatever, and that's their audio. Mm-hmm. And we have zero looping issues.
That's great. Well, that's definitely a starting point too. And then if you do have looping issues, you know, I would imagine it would come down to muting an open microphone of some sort. Do you have a minimal amount of open microphones?
We have 16 or so that are open at any given time. And so, you know, all we have to do, I have this set on my console. You can't see it, but I have it set as an independent out on my console. I'm running an Allen & Heath GLD. It's an older unit, but I literally can go to the streaming aux out and set which microphones I want into that mix. So if I have a panel discussion with someone who's in Palestine, I can do it that way. And I'm just using my existing hardware instead of, you know, all this other stuff that you know you don't really need. You can go that route, and it may sound better, but I literally, you know, it's crystal clear on our end. It just makes it super easy using what we have with the resources that we have, and you know, with budgets being frozen, it's even more fun to try to figure out how to buy stuff like that. So.
Well, that's so interesting. And it seems like also a lot of this really comes down to understanding how to use your digital audio mixer and setting up, is it almost like a preset, if you will? So when you know that input's coming in, you automatically mute most of the live microphones?
Yeah, I pick and choose. So I use, if I have like choir mics or whatever it may be, obviously, yeah, those are going to be muted because I don't want that rolling loop behind them. But at the same time, if it's a panel discussion, I can choose those 4, 5, 6, 10 microphones or whatever, and they're the ones that are going directly through that particular out, and also still staying in the house so people can hear them, but they're going through that particular out or that aux out on the console and into the computer. So the thing that you have to kind of coordinate is making sure that they don't talk on top of each other. So you kind of have to make sure that, you know, you have to have that human element to say, hey, you know, make sure that when such and such is talking, you just kind of have to roll through and say, this person's going to speak at this point, and so on, and go from there. You just have to be very clear about that with people on the other end. So
David Geckler's, you know, piping in here from YouTube saying, you know, you're almost creating a custom mix minus. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. It's a mix minus. You're mixing in a specific piece of audio that could create an audio loop, but you're minusing out the microphones that would create that possible audio loop. Because I do worry that some churches are just going to take the advice of just plug this in out of your laptop and plug it in and get a feedback loop. You probably will need to mute some of the microphones in the space. And that technically, if you wanted to do some research, would be a mix minus scenario.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Taylor, for jumping in there.
It's just something that I do literally like 3 times a week. So I was just over here. I was like, no, you don't need to buy all this stuff. It's just so easy. But yes, make sure if you're going to do it, make sure you kind of follow through. It is to kind of nice to have a diagram and kind of diagram it out. That's
yeah. And I've had so many churches tell me that they have a three ring binder, with the entire system. There's a wiring diagram there. Because a lot of us work with volunteers and trying to troubleshoot something on something that someone else built, who knows how long ago. You're working with an older digital audio mixer. You obviously have a good understanding of this. Well, thank you for chiming in there. If there's any other questions, there's a lot of stuff that we've covered. And Taylor, I don't know if you'd be maybe willing to come on maybe next Monday, and maybe we could take a closer look at how you're doing that.
Yeah, that's no problem.
All right. Maybe you could share your email with me.
Sure.
And we'll set you up for next week, because I'd love to dig deeper into that. And I'm sure Michael might want to jump in with that too, to kind of learn a little bit more about how you're doing that. I was thinking that's a perfect segue into next week. But I'm happy to stay around. If there's more questions coming in, I'm happy to stay here. Make sure that we're all here together now, so we might as well. If anybody wants to jump in, please do so.
Hey, Paul, I had a
Hi,
quick
Jeremy.
thing. How's it going, Paul?
Good.
I just had a quick idea about getting in comments, and that would be like if you're joining with a mobile device as well. I guess my virtual cam. So with when you're using virtual cam, which a lot of us know, like you have to roll back to a previous version of Zoom to do that. But NewTek has the new NDI HX Capture app.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's pretty sweet. The NDI Capture app will capture your whole iOS screen for your iPhone and send an NDI source into Wirecast or vMix or whatever, and then you can bring your iOS screen into Wirecast then and be able to show comments and kind of scroll through comments that way. So it's just a unique idea that I've been kind of throwing around, testing out how to get comments and everything like that into my web stream.
That's such a good idea. I'll have to. So basically, the NDI HX Capture app, and we can. Wow, that's great. And then we could maybe just use that as a sidebar or something into a confidence monitor. Bring it into Wirecast and show it up. That way. That's such a great idea. Well, I'm gonna have to look into that too. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, because I saw last week that NewTek put their camera app, their iOS camera app for free, and then the NDI Capture app, iOS app for free.
Really?
So,
free?
so I made sure to download that, and I'm telling all kinds of churches, hey, if you need to get up and streaming, just use your iPhone with the NDI Capture. That gets you up at least without, because I know a lot of the cameras have been hard to find and get shipped out. So yeah,
so here it is.
That's
here. NDI HX Capture. I'm gonna have to go ahead and try that. That's awesome.
Awesome.
Well,
just a PS on some, because I've seen this in some of the comments as well. At least for Windows users, Zoom has fixed the virtual cam issue.
Yes.
So virtual camera worked with Zoom, and then it didn't work with Zoom when they came out a couple of weeks ago with some of their security improvements. They followed that with there was a lot of complaining about it. They saw that and they responded. So the current version of Zoom works with OBS virtual cam plugin.
Thank goodness. I had a webinar that day. And I was just like, what am I supposed to do? I had to reroute a bunch of things. I remember that day, but they fixed it within 2 or 3 days. So there was a scare again. And that just shows you how many people are using this. This is incredible. So this right here, looks like we can use this NDI HX capture app. Looks like you just basically click start broadcast, and I guess it's whatever's on your screen. So if you're on Zoom, you should be able to just pull up your meeting and do that. So we'll look at that in more detail. That is really cool. I haven't been. Thank you, Jeremy. That is exactly what I think a lot of people need, at least as a starting point. And I have made the recommendation, Jeremy, to Wirecast to maybe try to integrate directly into Zoom, because I do think the more you can integrate into a single platform, Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom would really save, I think, a lot of people having to, just screen capture the Zoom comments when you're getting them on Facebook. But anyway, if there's any other questions, we're all here together, so we might as well ask, do as much as we can to answer everybody's questions.
I unmuted you, Alberto.
Oh, thank you. All right. Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Alberto.
Yep. Hello. So I've noticed a lot of people were talking about how to integrate it with the watcher, whoever's watching on stream. But speaking to some of the members of my Deacon board and trustee, they would just prefer that they just see the service by itself and not all the participants at the same time, for more of a privacy issue and stuff. We've had issues before where too much information gets out there, and we don't want that to happen again with our congregation.
Webinar is the solution for you.
Okay, so will Zoom be able, because we did get Zoom, so would Zoom just be able to just do the image by itself?
Or when you buy your Zoom Pro license,
which
there is a webinar add-on.
Okay.
So it's an additional feature that you have to pay for in Zoom, and the amount that you pay depends on the number of people who you want, what the capacity is that you want for your service. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
when you do that, it is just then a broadcast. You only see what the participants have no presence for other participants. You don't see the thumbnails, you don't see names, you don't see anything. You just see what is being broadcast out from your sanctuary in your case.
Okay. Yeah, because the only opportunity we would probably want people to see the participants is if we go into a literal room to be a breakout room for our Sunday school. Yeah. And they want people to join in at that time. Okay. And how do you run Zoom from an AV system? While you're doing the mixing, while you're doing the recording, how do you set up that webinar to just capture the image while too much?
Well, I'll tell you what we did. Okay. We bought a PTZ Optics USB camera.
Okay.
And in our 24-channel mixing board, we had one out finally. So there's one output that goes out to all the amplifiers and the speaker system in the sanctuary. There's another output that we had running into a digital recorder because we were recording our services. So we just put a splitter there. It was an RCA cable.
Okay.
We put a splitter there, and we ran that audio cable up and plugged it into the back of the camera because the PTZ Optics camera has an audio input.
Okay.
And what that allowed us to do was take the USB coming out of the camera. At that point, it had integrated and synchronized audio and video. So we didn't have to worry about video latency and the audio mismatching the lips and so on, because it was all coming out of the camera in a synchronized version. So basically, we have the PTZ Optics camera running into a laptop there over a USB cable. So it's just a webcam.
Okay.
And we have Zoom fired up. That webcam, it's an expensive webcam, but it's a great expensive. It's a great webcam, right? It's
I'm actually, because that's what I'm trying to recommend, a PTZ camera, because as I said, I was talking about privacy, and I want to put that camera as close to the front as possible, so you don't see the audience as able. And then I'm literally going to be taking the PTZ on one of our chandeliers, invert it, and then point it directly to the stage.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what, if you can, let's see, give me a second here. CCH. Let me open this with. So let me see if, I don't know if Tess has given me the option. No, Tess, are you still there? Can you?
I'm right here.
Okay, great. Could you allow me to share my screen? You might have to make me a co-host, but I promise not to do anything terrible.
Yeah, you should be able to share now.
Okay, share screen. Okay, good. Let me go to VLC. So I just wanted to show you something. There.
Okay.
So this, Alberto, can you see this?
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, good. So this is the view from the PTZ optics camera that we have mounted about 10 feet up on the back wall of our sanctuary.
Okay.
The sanctuary holds 360 people. So the way that we have it mounted with this particular view, we're still missing about 5 or 6 rows of chairs in the back.
Okay.
It sounds like your pastor has this, or your deacons have the same issues in terms of not wanting some people to be seen. So when I start a service, right, I'm going to be zooming in here.
Good morning, so
you can see I'm zooming all over the place here. Sorry
Okay.
for the audio. We have the children's chapel now.
journey.
Right. But here,
And
yeah, so we have different people who are sitting here. Here's our pastor. But this, we have the 20x zoom camera, and this is actually not zoomed in the whole way. I could actually get a little bit tighter on him.
Okay.
But you can see we have completely eliminated. I mean, we've gone from there to being zoomed way in on just part of that chair that is on the stage in the back. So yeah, we started off with, we bought a 12x camera. We tried it out and thought, no, we needed more. So we got a 20x, and that takes care of us. And that, given the geography of our sanctuary, it allows us to, and using the presets in the PTZ Optics camera app, we're able to zoom around between where the musicians are. You can see that over there on the right-hand side of the screen, there's where our guitarist is and where our pianist is, and it allows us to do everything.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually thinking of suggesting the 30 zoom because we have a longer haul, so to get in there. But can you just set the preset, Paul, Tess, can they be automatically set? So I'm not usually the only person who handles the Pro AV or the AV for my team, but I have to make it very easy there, so anybody who comes in, sits down, they don't have to mess around with it. They just can turn it on and go.
Well, a couple things I wanted to mention there. One is the 30x models that we offer on PTZ Optics, they don't come with USB. So the USBs max out at 20.
Okay.
But I do think, like Michael just showed, 20 does give you a pretty decent amount. If you'd like to go with 30x, you have to use the SDI models, which do support power over Ethernet, and SDI generally, you can run a long SDI cable and convert it to USB.
Can I do HD base T runs then?
If you want to use, then you could use an HDMI to HD base T converter. So you can have like a HD base T HDMI that usually runs over Cat5.
Right.
But yeah, you would be looking at that would be a good solution, would be like an HDMI extender.
Okay.
And then you might want to run 2 Ethernets. So one Ethernet for power and control.
Okay.
And then one Ethernet for an HDMI extender. and you can embed audio over HDMI.
Right.
So that might be a good solution because USB, while it's great, you can't run USB cables very long.
Right.
9 feet. All the USB extenders are, honestly, I hate to say this, but they just tend to fry up and break, even though they're supposed to last for a long time.
Yeah. And to be fair, once we got the USB thing running, then I got curious about that Ethernet jack in the back of the camera. so I thought, but I can do this over Ethernet. So I plugged it. I bought a $50 gigabit switch and plugged the camera into that, plugged my laptop into that, and using OBS, I am streaming my audio and video through the Ethernet. So I've actually ditched the USB cable entirely, but I'm still making use of the fact that I'm running my audio into the back of the camera, so it has completely eliminated any audio video sync issues that I have.
Well, that's good to hear. And the other thing that I'll mention about the USB that is kind of interesting, though, Michael, is that if you're using the USB with Zoom, you can actually control the camera with Zoom. So if it's plugged in via USB and you are at home, you can right-click the video of that camera and you can request camera control and you can zoom it in remotely. So it is kind of interesting in this conversation of we've got some people at home, we've got some people here. If you're volunteers at home, they can actually operate the zooming of the camera directly through Zoom from anywhere in the world. But that doesn't currently work through Ethernet. We are working on making that work. We do want to be able to have Zoom. Basically, if you have a USB connected PTZ Optics camera and you enable, and we have a video about this, you enable the remote PTZ control functionality in the Zoom dashboard, you can basically request camera control and have it approved by the host. And then that person from anywhere in the world can zoom the camera in, pan it around. And you can also have pan tilt limits. So they can't go too far this way or that way. But that does not currently work over Ethernet. It's something that we are developing and we hope to have available sometime in the May-June timeframe.
Okay.
And that uses something called NDI.
Okay.
But yeah,
I guess the other part of Alberto's question was, can you use the controller and kind of have it set up so that anybody can use it? And my experience is yes. So again, we're running a Windows-based laptop with Zoom in the sanctuary, but I use the standalone, not the OBS plugin. I use the standalone PTZ Optics controller app. You set the camera to be connected to your camera. The app can control up to 8 cameras. We only have one, but you connect it to that camera. You can program the 9 different presets. You can give them a name. You can control how quickly the pan and tilt and zoom goes. So we have it set so it's kind of a slow, gentle movement between the presets. But yeah, it's easy. I think it's easy. I'm training somebody this Wednesday, a new video volunteer who is a very, very low-tech person. So maybe next week I'll say, well, it's not as easy as I thought.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see.
That'd be great feedback, because that's the one thing is I just want to keep it low-tech enough. I've tried writing out charts. I've tried writing out information for people, but most of the time it's, especially since it's been now 2 months since we've been in the building and nobody's actually touched it in a while, everybody's going to be extremely rusty, and I'm going to need to run a whole basically new seminar on how to manage the old and the new equipment that we're getting due to the event.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a whole cadre of audio volunteers over the years. We always have 5 or 6 people who know how to run the soundboard, and I think that it's going to be so 2 things. One is that what I've learned over the last few months is that you can't have one person doing both jobs. It's too mind-boggling for somebody to be running the mixing board and turning microphones on and off, and also running camera presets in Zoom. So you pretty much need to have an audio volunteer and a video volunteer. In my experience, the video side of it is simpler than the audio side of it. That it's going to be easier for us to train competent video volunteers than it's going to be to have competent audio volunteers.
Okay, thank you.
I agree completely. I did kind of want to ask Alberto, what streaming software or mixing software are you using on your computer?
At the moment, I literally am trying to get my church over to streaming. I actually, back in December, I said, we need to move into streaming. And one of the deacons said, oh, why do we need that? Nobody's going to be watching that. And then the same guy in February, he's like, how's our streaming capabilities? And I'm like, needs work. So right now we have a pre-Sonos 24 board right now.
Okay.
At the moment, the most I was able to get them to get was a Elgato streaming card to bring the image in, but we don't have the structure set up so we can actually do live streaming. So as of this week, they're going to be discussing. I was like, I need a PTZ camera. I actually, I am also getting an A10 Mini Pro
Great.
to make things a little easier. And I was also even thinking of suggesting a Stream Deck to have presets set up.
Those are nice. Yeah.
But that's, as I said, this is all, I'm starting from anew. I'm just happy that I may have a couple weeks to sit in the sanctuary alone and mess around with things to try to figure out what's going on. But I know that moving into the future, we will have older members of the congregation who may not want to come into the building until everything is set in stone, but we also want to provide that service. So that's why I'm trying to pre-plan. So right now, all we have is the sound captured, and then the way I'm sending the video is currently through YouTube live via OBS and Elgato. So.
Okay, well, that's a good start. And there's so many folks, in that same boat. So, don't worry. The nice thing about OBS is that because it is completely free, you can install it on your computer at home. Your other volunteers can install it on their computers at home. They can get familiar with it, while they're waiting, before Sunday. That is one of the small issues with some of the paid platforms, is the software, is that you can only get one license for it, so you can't bring it home and practice. So that is a nice thing about OBS. And there's a free book that I wrote called The Guide to Open Broadcaster Software. You can download it at ptzoptics.com/book. I'm a huge fan of OBS. If you know how to use it, you can customize it, and you can even put the PTZ camera controls inside of OBS. But like Michael said, I think a lot of people quickly start to use the iPhone app or the Android app because it's just that much easier. But I think for a volunteer, they come in, they don't have the app yet, or their phone's out of battery. Having it on the inside of OBS is kind of a nice way to go about it too.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right. Well, if there's any final questions, we can take them now. What I'm thinking is we're going to invite Taylor on next Monday, and everyone else is invited as well. We're going to look at some different ways to route some of this stuff. So that we can bring the audio from Zoom into a sanctuary. So I think that's going to be an important tool. On Wednesday on the PTZ Optics show, this is all stirring up so much information. I'm thinking we're going to just cover using the USB PTZ Optics camera with an audio input from an audio board and how easy that could be, because so many folks seem to be using that. And yeah, speak now, or we'll see you next Monday.
I did unmute you, Benjamin.
Hey,
Hi,
Paul,
Benjamin.
how are you? Hey,
I'm good.
Good. So I really actually wanted to get back to one of the things that you had spoke about early when we first started the conference call. You mentioned, and we were having discussions, and I would definitely love to hear from the rest of the group, how you guys are handling engagement. So our church has been streaming to YouTube for years. We were on Ustream. We switched over to YouTube about 2 years ago. When COVID-19 happened, we added Facebook, and we've been streaming. But I think one of the challenges that I really see is really that engagement. So what are you all doing as far as like, how are you engaging beyond just a one-way stream? How are you engaging post the stream? Like what are you guys doing? Because I know Zoom is definitely the way to go, and we've done Zoom calls, but like, what are some of the things that you all are intentionally doing to bring about more parishioner membership engagement directly after the stream has ended?
I think that's such a great question. And I do think that it's going to require some more, obviously a moderator who can kind of be that bridge in between the questions that are online and getting those questions to the worship leaders. And how does that work? Does that mean we have a confidence monitor? Does that mean we have a tablet in front of the pastor who is looking at maybe a Google Sheet where the moderator is saying, here's question one, maybe just 3 questions. And, the moderator is constantly updating that Google Sheet. So there's always like at least 3 questions for the pastor to look at. I know a lot of churches have been chiming in saying they're using solutions like vMix Social, which allow you to maybe just, quickly bring up a comment on the screen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the pastor's seeing it. And then we talked a little bit with Michael about, do we allow the people in the Zoom conference to unmute themselves and literally speak to the congregation? And how does that work? And that's something we're going to cover next Monday as far as a technical audio perspective. But does anyone in the conference want to chime in there and talk about what has worked or what you think could work for better engagement during this time when we're trying to not only have people come back to church and be in there locally, but maintain the remote connection?
I have a couple of things to add to add what you just said, Paul. And so what are they? Number one is that something that our pastor did last week. So we have an email that goes out on Friday. And one of the things he said is, here's what we're going to be talking about on Sunday. And I would be interested in any thoughts that you have about this topic. So part of engagement was the pastor actually getting ahead of the curve via email with the congregation saying, hey, think about this and what might you have to offer. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is that we created, it was a voluntary opt-in, but we wanted people to have the opportunity to meet with one another in small groups during the week as a way of providing social support for each other, community and spiritual support for each other, help to keep our community bonded. And 400 people signed up for that. So we have 40 Zoom groups that meet at various times during the week with 10 people in them. And one of the consequences of that is getting people in our community accustomed to sitting in front of a computer and interacting remotely. So the more that they do that in small groups, the more likely they are to step into the large room.
I love that tip. And another tip that I wanted to share really quickly is, now this is something that might be maybe more reserved for a Friday night trivia or something, but you can actually host trivia and really do some engaging. If you really want to talk about engagement, you can literally have live trivia and, after the service is over, have a fun session where everyone logs into something called Kahoot. There's another one called CrowdPurr where you could have 10 really funny questions or maybe questions about the service. But like literally show a leaderboard. It's something that we've done on StreamGeeks. It does take a little time and preparation, and we all know how busy everything is, getting up to the service. But there are some great ways to use engagement. And one of my favorites is saying, hey, everybody, we're going to have a little quiz, a little trivia. And then you show this like friendly little competition leaderboard. Oh, John from Indiana got this one right, and followed up by him is Sally. And, so you can do some really fun stuff. And we've talked about it on this channel a little bit. But the other thing too, that's kind of fun and engaging, which I don't think a lot of churches have done, and I don't know how important this is, but you can do like live thank yous for contributions and donations. And I don't know how, that's maybe more reserved for nonprofits or doing fundraising. But I have seen that for nonprofits fundraising, doing things, just to get the mind stirring. I'm not saying that anyone would necessarily do this in a church setting, but you could have a balloon blow up if somebody donates $100, or confetti cannon. I mean, that's a little overboard, but there are like really kind of fun and engaging things you can do. The more you start thinking about what's appropriate and engaging, because I mean, we are connected now online. So what do you want to do with that? Do you want to have a live trivia? Do you want to thank people for donations with a lower third, or something actually happening, or the pastor just saying thank you? I think the core of it really is a moderator in between the online meeting, which is the Zoom meeting, and the, worship leaders. And how does that communication happen? Are there questions being asked on the behalf of the Zoom meeting participants? Are we allowing Zoom meeting participants to just go ahead and speak directly to the pastor? I think that's super powerful. And it definitely happens on broadcast television all the time, right? I mean, that's what we're doing right now, right? Aren't we live streaming and having a Zoom meeting and speaking to people from all around the world? So it's just kind of translating what we're doing now into a worship setting and making sure that the worship leadership feels comfortable with maintaining, the experience that they're comfortable with, and that they're, would love to translate to the online world, I believe. So this has been so exciting, Michael. And I think we've already set up a great topic for on Monday, really trying to walk through what it takes to have an open Zoom meeting inside of a worship service, and what does it mean from a technical perspective? What does it mean from a monitoring perspective? Maybe covering a little bit more, like we talked about, of really understanding the security and moderation features of Zoom, because that will be important if you have a live microphone coming into the church. You definitely might want to have a locked meeting, or at least have all the security features enabled for your moderator to protect them from doing things, the way that they'd like.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been amazing. I am so excited. Let's meet back up next Monday. We're going to do this every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. And we have a great topic. Taylor's agreed to join us. So thank you, Taylor. Let's connect. I'm not going to close the Zoom room, but I'm going to turn the live stream off. And then Taylor, if you can just hang out for a second, I want to get your information so we can chat